welcome to a very special episode of Hopinions. Martin and I are joined this week by a couple of guests, and we're going to let the guys introduce themselves.
Hey guys, I'm Josh. I'm the brand ambassador for Goose Island for Europe. I work directly with Chicago and I look after events and training.
Hi, I'm Johnny Tyson. I work for Pioneer. We look after Goose Island amongst other breweries for Europe, and I'm in charge of knowledge and training.
Excellent, and obviously Martin's here. Martin, how are you doing?
Evening, not too bad, mate. Looking forward to this.
Good, good. So why are we here, mate?
Well, we were inspired, Steve, by a blog from one of our friends, Justin Mason. He writes under Get Beer, Drink Beer. And he wrote a piece called The Moral High Ground, Shades of Grey. And he really did nail a few really good points about big beer, the industry, buyouts. Does it change what you buy, what you think of them, that kind of thing. And that sort of got us thinking. And at the same time as that, I think one of the people who listened to our podcast regularly got in contact with you, who was from Goose Island, a colleague of the guys here.
Absolutely, yeah. Thom, who's known to you guys, got in touch and said, really enjoy listening to the show. Would you be interested in doing something with Goose Island? And we had a few conversations, and here we are, sat around the table to talk about beer, and probably most importantly to drink some beer as well. So shall we? We're going to do a few beers in this show. So let's get into the first one now. What have you got for us first of all?
So first beer that I've got is our 312. We're actually pouring this one out of cans. We've just got cans over into the UK, which is great. So 312 stands for it's the dialing code of Chicago. This is actually said to be one of Barack Obama's favourite beers as well. We had him in an interview talking about it as a fellow Chicagoan. But basically it's American wheat ale. So
A fellow
Chicagoan. Chicagoan.
I'm not going to get my mind around that one, yeah.
Trying to say it with a Jamaican accent. Chicagoan, not Chicagoan. So it's an American wheat ale. For me, this it's a big trading piece for sort of venues in the UK especially. American wheat ales aren't like Belgian Vit beers or German Weiss beers. Actually, traditionally, the yeast strain you would use is an English style ale yeast. And our sort of Goose Island house ale yeast it derives from an English style ale yeast. So you're not going to get a lot of those leading flavours that you do, like the cloves and the bananas and the bubblegum. But also, you get the citrus notes from the hops. And actually you add less additions of wheat, so around 30% in American wheat ale. So with that, you're not going to get a sort of full body, but it's almost like a nice light summer ale. I would put it more into that English sort of summer ale category. That's actually what we enter it into the Great American Beer Festival. We picked up 4 medals with this one at the Great American Beer Festival as well. So.
Excellent.
Okay,
So shall we get stuck in, yeah?
Cheers.
Cheers.
It's 4.2% as well,
Yeah.
so quite
It's really,
lower on
really
the
light,
ABV.
yeah.
It's very light.
It's incredibly light on the mouthfeel, and just on the flavours that are in there as well. It's a really light, easy beer. I can see why you'd want to drink this in the summer. Perfect sort of like summer refreshing beer. Absolutely,
and the thing for this one for me is coming. I've run a lot of bars in my past. That's where I come from. We've sold this in previous pubs. We're in the White Horse in Parsons Green tonight, and it's a pub that I ran for a couple of years. We've sold this beer and generally would sell it to lager drinkers, to those guys that kind of want to try something different, maybe take a dip into craft, but don't want to get scared away by the high bitterness you might get with an IPA. So it's kind of a nice crossover style. Again, the guys that would come in and drink wheat beers, maybe Schneider Weiss or Franciscana, I wouldn't necessarily serve a pint of this to them. I'd allow them to try it first, because these guys might turn around and go, well, actually, it's not got those banana notes, it's not as full-bodied, it's not what they're looking for. So it's all about getting it to the right customer. But as you said, a pint of this in the summer, it's perfect.
Yeah, so the wheat is just a component part, isn't it, rather than just being the overriding factor.
Yeah.
Like the wheat beers you described from Germany there, the Schneider Weiss, that is the big thing, isn't it? Then you get the banana, the cloves, whereas for this one, it's just another element of the beer, isn't it?
Yeah, and it doesn't have, Belgian wit beer has coriander and curacao orange peel traditionally in it, other versions of other things in them, but this doesn't. This is just quite sort of straightforward.
Yeah.
It's a really delicious but easygoing, sessionable beer.
Yeah, it's almost quite fruity on the palate.
Yeah, it's really easy to drink.
Yeah.
And comes in a can now as well.
Yeah. So it's a plan that we're planning to bring our cans across. 312 is the first. IPA is going to be coming soon as well. Big advocate at Goose Island in Chicago with canning. Obviously for the packaging benefits, also the protection from the sort of the effects of the sun on the hops. So yeah, no, it's great, and it looks great on the shelf for me.
Okay, so you said early on that this is obviously this is one of your core range beers.
Mm-hmm.
What else sits within that core range for Goose Island?
So we've got our 3 core beers. Leading the way is our IPA, which we're going to try in a sec. And we've also got our Honkers Ale, which is one of the first beers we brewed back in '88, which is kind of inspired by Fuller's London Pride, one of John's favourite beers and favourite breweries in London. Again, it was kind of an inspiration for John starting the brewery. Used to drink in this pub in the White Horse, used to drink Fuller's London Pride here. So that's another one of the 3. And then we've got extended core, which are over. So we've just got Green Line Pale Ale over, which unlike other American pale ales at the moment, it's more to that English side. It's not dry hopped, it's not as fruity, it's kind of nice and balanced. So again, I'd kind of put it in those kind of character, the guys that are drinking lager that might want something with a bit more malt, but it's not going to shock the palate. We're all about balanced beers. And then we've got 4-Star Pils has just come over as well, which is a really, really cool. It's an American Pilsner. It's got some nice citrus hops in there, some Zythos, 5.1%. So yeah, we've got some good stuff over.
It's quite a good range of beers available in the UK right now.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And we're looking to bring some of our sours across as well. We've got Clapton Craft currently stocked some of them. Obviously, they're very limited beers, but we are, part of my job as well is to fight to get some of the more limited beers over.
Let's just come back a little bit to the brewery itself. So Goose Island itself. Give us the kind of potted history of the brewery. When did it start? The development of it, and where it is now.
Yeah, sure. So we started off as a brew pub in 1988. We're actually the first brewery in Chicago. The last one closed down in around 1972. John Hall, founder, started it as a brew pub in '88. His kind of previous job, because John's not a brewer. John started the company. His previous job was kind of corporate America, working in packaging. Spent a lot of time traveling Europe, UK especially, and if you look at what styles of beer were popular in the US at that time, it was those macro lager styles. And John fell in love with English ale, fell in love with Belgian beer, and when he came back to Chicago, he thought Chicago was ready to try something. So started up a brew pub in '88. That's when we released Honkers, our first beer, and kind of went from strength to strength. A lot of John's friends thought he was a bit, a bit mad, really.
Well, Honkers is very different to what was on offer, because my first visit to the States was 1989.
Yeah.
And the few times I could get a beer, because I was 18, so I was legal age in the UK, and seemed to be vastly underage for drinking in America, which is a bit of a nightmare for me. And they were quite strict about it as well, but it was the macro lager. So the Honkers Ale was actually quite, although that was he did it as an ode to London Pride, it was quite brave.
It came across actually like it was people saw that as hugely bitter. Like it was a very challenging style for Chicago people at the time. Definitely. 30 IBUs, 29 IBUs.
It's about 29 more than what they were used to.
33 IBUs more than they were used to. Yeah, exactly. So it was, but now that's kind of one of our most, not as it's more bitter than 312 definitely, but it's seen as one of our nice rounded beers. It was a big kind of challenge at the time. Mm-hmm. So we started the brew pub in '88, and very, very kind of quickly it became very popular. Then 1995 we opened up Fulton Brewery, so that's where we brew today still, 50 barrel brew kit, and again it's gone from strength to strength. We started off a barrel aging program, barrel fermenting with Sour Sisters and Bourbon County Stout, which started in 1992 with Greg. So that was probably going back a little bit, that was the next key moment. John's kind of ethos was loves London Pride, loves kind of low ABV balanced British ales. So his inspiration for the beers he wanted the guys to brew were the IPA, English style with an American twist, the kind of English bitters. When Greg joined in '92, actually as a master brewer, he loved what his dad did, but it was almost this conflict because he was like, Dad, I want to do new things, I want to innovate, I want to bring out stuff that people haven't seen before. So Greg was really the brainchild of Bourbon County Stout and the sour beers that we do now as well. So it's just given us, for me, we do over 60 beers over the year, and we've just got a really kind of almost conflicting portfolio, but we cover a lot of styles, and you know, there's somebody there for everyone.
So within those 60 beers, are there a lot of seasonals as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We're bringing out our spring ale will be our sort of last link in the chain for our seasonals. So we do a winter ale, which is a lovely nut brown, so that's going to be coming over to the UK. We've got Oktoberfest over at the moment, so look out for that. That's a really nice beer. We've got our summer ale, which is a Kolsch, German Kolsch style beer, and our spring ale, which is going to be new for 2017. So I haven't tried that one yet either, so I'm excited.
Okay. Yeah. So let's just get some more thoughts on the 312. I noticed both our glasses.
We're finished. Yeah, we're finished.
What do you think of the beer?
It would be. I think it was well described by Josh earlier. It's a good gateway.
Yeah.
I think if someone really had a real love for the German wheat beers, the stronger dark ones, or the very coriander heavy Belgian ones, I would be like Josh. I don't think they'd get that much from it. Whereas I quite like, yes, is the answer to the question which Josh was about to ask.
Yeah. Didn't even come out of my mouth.
Yeah. But the it's very light. It's very drinkable.
Yeah.
A little bit of dryness at the end as well, which is quite nice. Makes you want to go back for more. So it works well.
But that just adds itself to that. If you were drinking this beer in the summer, it's going to give you a lovely refreshing feel, but it's going to give you that dryness as well that you want. That's going to make you want to carry on again and again and again.
And I think that's the point, that it is like you said, it's a gateway beer. There's plenty of people out there who haven't had massively hopped IPAs, who would be, you know, their palates might be a bit kind of put off by that, you know, and they go into the sort of the contemporary craft beer kind of world. It's beers like this which get new drinkers in who've been drinking sort of mainstream lagers.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, well made actually, because we can forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
Because we're not gateway ourselves.
No, we've moved on from.
Yeah.
The gates are long.
Yeah.
It's way back there. But I think, you know, that is the thing, and I've seen that coming from the other end of the bar. You know, number one, the bar staff and the guys working have to keep the beer well, so that you make sure that pint tastes great when the customer gets it. But also they need to know what style of beer to especially give to a first-time craft beer drinker, somebody that wants to try maybe an IPA. I would always find out what they normally drink. You know, give them a little taster, of course, but don't just go in straight with a pint. And you know, I think can be a bit of a palate shock.
Can be put off more people than you want to actually win over. Yeah, absolutely.
Give them a triple IPA, or Pliny the Younger, or something.
Super sour. Yeah.
That'll get them in. So let's go back to chatting about obviously the history and the evolution of the brewery. In 2011, there was a decision to sell up. To AB InBev. I don't imagine it was a decision that was taken very lightly at the time. What was the driving force behind the decision at that time?
So, I mean, exactly. It wasn't a decision that was made overnight. John sort of considered a few options. There are other options on the table apart from AB InBev, but John's kind of background, he was approaching 70 at the time, and you know, he'd done a good 27 years bringing Goose Island from a brew pub up to what it was. We were in about 23 states at the time, and reaching that point where we couldn't really get our beer out to any more people. We were at capacity, so the brewery needed a huge amount of investment to, you know, John's ethos. He wants to get his beer to more people. He wants to get the beer in as many hands as possible. That's the way he saw it. So you know, needed that massive investment, and John wasn't, I guess, prepared to take on a hell of a lot of debt. He was at that time in his life when he was, you know, he's done some really good stuff, and probably not have a bit. I say have a bit of retirement. That wouldn't really fit, because you know, John spends a lot of time with me.
Say, he hasn't really retired, has he?
No.
We recently did an event, block party, and you know, and John was doing the speaking with that. You know, chatting about the brewery. So no, he is still massively involved, but obviously didn't want to take a massive lot of debt onto himself. And AB InBev, you know, sort of spoken to John about this. It was the right fit. It had the correct logistics for the brewery to exist. You know, the best kind of brewing systems in the world. And it just fit really.
I think for John as well, it was important the integrity of the beer remained. I think that was one of the things which shows in the fact that he's still, you know, I'm sure he doesn't have to come out to the block party and Migration Week and other events that we run throughout this country and throughout the world, but he's still there. he still turns up and he's speaking and he helps us with our events. And he's a great draw because he's a great personality and that level of passion that early on as the risk taker. And he wouldn't stand next to us if he didn't want to stand behind the same beer that he brewed back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, a couple of friends of ours went to the block party in London, and they both written blogs about it, and they were both paying the bit which really came across is when John started speaking, no one else was. He was at the top of a few steps, and everyone was listening to what he had to say. And like you say, he doesn't have to do it. I mean, if he was 70, he must be mid-70s now.
Yeah.
You know, he's piping slippers almost, and he's obviously doing quite the opposite.
Absolutely, and sort of did the migration events we did as well. Had lots of live music on for that in London, and just John's up dancing. John's up there later than the rest of us. He's massively passionate, and of course he would be because Goose Island's his baby, and it still is. He's a good confidant. I get great advice from John as well. And when he comes over, we take him to pubs and what do you think of this? And still shaping it.
So part of what we did was for these two shows was to ask our audience. We'll normally run a poll every week for the podcast, but we actually ran 3 for this one because we've obviously been planning this for a few weeks and we wanted to make it something that people would listen to as well. So Hopinions, 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 Hopinions. The first poll that we ran was about the ownership of Goose Island, and we asked people, is big beer ownership of smaller brands a good thing for the industry? Now we had 179 votes on this one. 79% of those said no, they didn't think it was a good thing. Only 8% said yes, and 13% of people simply didn't care. Which you can take that either way. I suppose there's always an element of ambivalence within these sort of things, but some of the comments that we had from some of our listeners were Mark at Kelfired, if Big Beer use their size to secure hop contracts for the small companies without driving others out of business, it's good, but I don't trust Big Beer to work that way. Profit over product generally wins. The Bearded one said, people seem to think that Big Beer is bad, but Big Beer is raking it in like supermarkets. Someone must be buying it. Pete McCary at PJ McCary said his main concern is macros dominating taps and shelves. Aside from that, if the beer's still good and they treat the staff well, then all's good. And then the last one is from Matthew Perrett at Pat Perrett 8. Can't see a positive, yet to be convinced of any negative. Not sure that helps though, which is probably a great one from Matt.
But he felt passionate about his ambivalence.
But he wanted to comment, which is great.
He wanted to get involved.
It's great that people get involved in these sorts of things with us. So how do you guys react to some of those comments that Big Beer is simply trying to take over the industry?
I think I can understand people being wary. I totally sympathise with that. And perhaps if you looked at the brewing industry in the 60s and 70s, particularly in the UK, with how the Big Six operated, and some of your older listeners will be able to remember what we mean by the Big Six breweries that tended to dominate and buy up and amalgamate, close breweries down. And I think the difference is now with the craft beer movement is that people want diversity and they want choice. And if a large brewery bought a small one and closed it down and took away all the choice and just produced one beer, they would lose out. They're not going to grow. It would be a complete mistake to do that. The value of someone like Goose Island is that we produce so many different beers. There is an amazing array of flavours. There's something for everybody. You're not just buying, ABI did not just buy the Goose label. They bought the liquid inside the bottle, and I think that's very important. That if that was devalued in some way, there wouldn't be any business left. But the reverse is true. Goose Island's never been more popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think for me as well is there are breweries like Goose Island and John. We wanted to expand and we wanted to get out there, and in order for us to do that, we needed a great logistics system, a great distribution system to ensure that it got over fresh. And as I say, it needed a lot of investment. There's so many different ways it's happening at the moment, private equity or whether it's bigger brewers buying out. I think the big thing for me is what they're doing with those breweries, and it's all about the quality that comes out at the end. But also the great thing, and I can speak for Goose Island only in this because I've worked specifically with them. It's job opportunities are great. The sort of the roles that I've come out working with Goose Island, like my role as brand ambassador for Europe. There are 3 of me in the world, not me specifically. We've got
that would be weird.
There's 3 clones. Yeah, we're cloning people.
So big beer is cloning. You heard it here first.
There you go. Exclusive. So we've got Mariana over in looking after Mexico, and we've just taken on somebody for China as well, Didi, and it's great. It's creating these jobs that not necessarily have sort of existed before, and also we're taking Goose Island to bars that have never stocked craft beer before. I'm walking into bars where they've got 5 lager lines on, and we're coaching these guys into the craft market. And when we go in, and especially when we're coaching someone on craft beer, we're almost holding their hands and sort of showing them what craft beer is. We'll always go in and say, have a local line. It's not about let's tie all your lines off. It's mix and match. Get your local lines on, support local, but also have an American craft beer in as well. And it's kind of, for me, it's opening up the market, and I've been out there seeing it. It's actually opening doors to bars that might never have had craft before, or we're kind of first adopters.
And I think that a company like ours, can open those doors. That small local brewers perhaps would find hard to get a local craft beer in a hotel group, for example. That's a tough ask for any salesperson, but perhaps with a mix of beers that we can break trail in areas where people have not used to seeing craft beer or specialty beer before, and once we prove that this kind of style of beer works, a couple of years down the line, that opens a door for other brewers to go in. Local brewers perhaps when they want to develop their offering, they'll then go to a local brewer as well, and without us going into those kind of accounts, they may never have been confident enough to take on a craft IPA or a, whatever there might be. So certainly we're sort of breaking trail, and hopefully that'll see the expansion. Instead of treading on the toes of everybody in the craft beer bars, we're actually expanding the market, and hopefully we can all benefit from that.
So some skeptics might say to what you've just said there that actually what you're trying to do is go in and take over the taps in a bar and to stop others from coming in. But I guess from what you've just both said there, that's absolutely not the case.
It doesn't make sense. You want choice. You want local. You need to support local because we need local breweries around. Of course, I mean, number one, I love going to local breweries and drinking. It's great beer. It's about having different choices available. For me and my background and running bars, I would never just have one brewery tied onto all my beers. It just doesn't. Choice that's the whole great thing about this beer revolution is choice, and we want more. Because
I suppose the place where most of us are at now, we spoke about a few minutes ago about the gate being way in the distance. In terms of those gateway beers, is that I don't want to come into a bar and drink the same beers from the same brewery necessarily all evening. I want to be able to dip in and out of different beers and try different styles and different breweries and have an evening trying different things. So that's important for me as a beer consumer, and it's encouraging to hear that as a business, that's the way that you guys are approaching it as well.
Craft beer is all about choice, and if we that's what's really driven it. It's not that there's been this one new beer that comes out that everybody wants to drink. There's over 4,000 breweries in the US. There's 1,500 breweries more than in the UK. It's a huge amount of beer being produced. There's plenty of choice out there for everybody, and there's plenty of room. I think there's plenty of room for everyone because the craft beer market on the whole is generally growing. Around the world, it's generally growing in this country, in Asia, in the US. Portland and the state of Oregon, over 50% of the beer sold in Oregon is craft beer. That's an amazing growth of turning around what was probably 30 years ago, probably less than 2%.
That on its own is a pretty amazing stat.
I mean, that is. Yeah. I mean, they are the flag bearers of American craft.
Still,
that is, but
if you still on its own, it's that half the beer sold would be classed as craft.
Yeah, in terms of value, in terms of value rather than volume.
Yeah, but they're still pretty amazing.
We're a long way off of that here, aren't we?
Long way off.
Yeah. Should we get into the next beer before we continue? So I think what we've got coming up next is the classic Goose Island IPA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think a lot of people probably would have cut their teeth on as maybe being one of their first craft beers.
Goose Island
Yeah. So while you're just pouring these out for us, tell us a little bit about this beer in particular.
Absolutely. So we started brewing Goose IPA back in 1990. This is our flagship beer. So you had Sierra Nevada had their pale ale at the time, and they kind of had the sort of, that was their style. They were brewing, we didn't want to do a pale ale, so we came up with IPA. So our IPA, we've got 6 medals at the Great American Beer Festival, which makes it the most awarded for its in its style category, which we're still very proud of. We've also got our own hop farm as well in Idaho, Elk Mountain Farm. So that's another great thing about sort of the partnership with AB InBev. Elk Mountain Farms a few years ago was literally a few acres. It was pretty much going out of business. It became on the radar with Goose Island guys, and it was like there's this opportunity to acquire this hop farm, and now I think they're at about 1,700 acres, providing a lot of jobs. But for us as well, amazing hops. We've even got a lab there where we're cross-training new breeds, which will be available to Goose Island on the way.
And are those hops exclusively for Goose Island juice, or does some of them get sold off to other contracts?
At the moment, I believe we're using it mainly for Goose. I'm not sure how we grow, where those go, but at the moment, exclusive. So, but that just that alone, it means that we get the best choice of hops, the best quality ingredients, which I think is another key benefit. So this one comes in at 5.9%. It's based on an English style IPA. So this one's actually, again, it's like our other beers. It's all about the balance. You should get a nice malt sweetness at the beginning. We've got some European hops in there, some Styrian Goldings. We've also got some Cascade and some Centennial, some of the American hops. I get a lot of pine resin on this one, sort of white pine resin, a little bit of herbaceous notes, and it's got a nice bitterness on the back. It's just
pithiness to it.
Okay,
Shall we get into it?
Cheers.
Cheers.
So I think this, for me, this combines elements of the American style IPA as well as the sort of British style IPAs, which has that hoppiness, has those American hops, but they're not like a punch in the face. This is very much sort of sort of described to me one of the guys from Chicago as a mid-Atlantic IPA. They're really trying to sort of showcase the sort of the malt and the drinkability of a British beer, while just having those American hops there, but not overwhelming. It's nowhere near a West Coast style American IPA.
And equally, it's not going out towards what's now starting to become a bit of an East Coast IPA as well. It is well balanced. I don't think you can say anything else. It is definitely a well balanced drinking beer. Doesn't taste like a 5.9. So I was quite surprised when you said that. I have to admit, because I always had Goose Island in my head closer to 5 than 6.
No, it's 5.9. It's that for me just really does point towards the great balance you get with it. You don't notice the alcohol, which in that as well. Love pairing this with things like blue cheese. Every time I drink this now, I want a piece of blue cheese next to me, just because it really pairs very well.
I didn't. I do now.
Yeah, sorry. I had to share that.
I can barely talk for the salivation that's in my mouth right now. Yeah, because that's all I can think.
That and carrot cake. Carrot cake goes very, very well with Goose IPA as well.
No, I'm less of a sweet tooth, but there's blue cheese in my head now.
But it's great because you can showcase this with blue cheese and carrot cake, and you can show people
maybe
how
not
amazing.
at the same time.
Not at the same time, but
because that would just be weird.
But you can
or
show people.
You can
show people exactly what beer can do.
Yeah,
that's the
as
thing,
a food pairing. That's something that both Josh and I are really into.
We did a beer in the cheese pairing at work.
Yeah.
For the beer tasting club that I run, and about half of the club are the regulars, but the other half weren't. They were, because we got Melissa Colding to do the hosting for us, and the whole thing about the cheese and beer pairing, whereas people in their heads have often got wine and or port with cheese. They were quite intrigued by it. It works fantastically well. Really does.
Well, cheese, and someone described it. I think it was probably Garrett Oliver or someone both described. Beer and cheese are both sort of grasses that have been sort of reimagined. Grass is eaten by a cow; it's turned into cheese. Barley is a kind of grass, and we turn it into beer. So there is that sort of kind of embryonic connection between the two.
Synergy somewhere along the line.
Somewhere along the line, and it does go. And it does go very, very well. They do go very well together, and it's. Not that there's some great wine cheese pairings out there as well. I'm not saying that, but I think beer can offer a whole nother dimension to food and to food pairing.
Well, I mean, we often have people bring cheese to our bottle share, Steve.
Yeah, and it always gets destroyed.
Yes.
In seconds. Yeah. It just works so well.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of this beer, the flavours on it, like you say, you do get that resinous feel on the nose, and on the flavour, it is more. It's a lovely balance between the malt and the hops in there. As you said, that you're not getting smacked in the face by hops. They're there. They let you know they're there, but it's balanced out very well with the malt finish.
Yeah, there's a slight sweetness on the palate as well on it.
Yeah. Now, obviously, this being probably your, I suppose, your predominant beer from your range, the one that you're most well known for. There are a lot of people that have commented that your beers have changed since you've changed ownership. What do you say when people say, oh, well, the core beers taste different now?
I think, for me, and again, working personally back with the brewers in Chicago and going back there with the guys, I think for me that there's a bit of a stigmatism that almost people associate with acquisition, that they're almost expecting. I don't know where it's come from. We've done a lot of work. I'm chatting with the guys. There's been rumours out there that we've changed the yeast strain, for instance, specifically was one that came out. We kind of addressed those points with Mike Siegel, who's at head of innovation. We still use the same yeast strain. We actually use around about 21 different yeast strains over the year, but for our core beers, we use our house ale yeast strain, which is the first one that we actually took. It was an English style ale yeast. And we're still using that in this beer. It's a bit of a bastard strain, so it started off as English. We've isolated it. It's, the brewers say, I'm not a brewer myself, but Mike and I say it's not the best yeast strain to work with, but it's our identity. So that was specifically something that's been rumoured around, which is categorically not true. And then, the other side to it, obviously acquisition in 2011, 23 states. How have we got our beer out now in all states in America, 8 countries outside? That's because we have 2 breweries outside of Goose Island and Fulton, one in Baldwinsville, one in Colorado, which are AB InBev breweries, and it's taken a long time. It's been 5 years now, but we've worked out a really good system to be able to take certain recipes. We take them to a pilot system that's AB InBev owned, which is a smaller version, and then we'll basically test the beers at Fulton Brewery as home first, to decide whether they're going to be good to scale up. Then we take them to the pilot brewery and we really test them there. Then if they go through those tests, we'll put them to say Baldwinsville, which is the core beers that we have. That's where they're brewed. And we have this sort of triangle blind tasting back at Fulton. Every batch brewed goes back and is tasted by the brewers, who have to sign it off.
It's analysed by the lab.
It's a very, very rigorous process. It's
any brewer will tell you scaling up from, when you have even a small brewery, when they've taken their recipe, their homebrew recipe, and they scale it up to a microbrewery, or a microbrewery wants to expand to a slightly larger size. Whenever you change equipment, you change fermenters, you change shapes of the fermenters, you change your mash tun, whatever you do, you have to tweak your brewing techniques to ensure that the flavour is identical. You can't just times the recipe by 10 for a 10 times bigger brew kit. It doesn't. Just wish it was that simple. It's not that simple. But every single beer, as Josh said, comes back and gets tested. Every single batch gets tested, and if it doesn't taste right, if they don't feel it's representative of Goose IPA or 312, then it gets turfed. Simple as that. It's a very stringent level of testing to make sure the beers do taste the same.
So the Goose IPA is essentially the same beer. 1990, I think you said it came out.
Yep.
To now.
Yeah. So the only thing that can differ is sort of the hopping varieties may not have been exactly the same from the start due to harvest, what's available, but the core, the recipe, the yeast strain are the same. And actually, in terms of Goose IPA being brewed at Baldwinsville and coming over to us, the guys have told me that actually they have to put we have to put more dry hopping, more amounts of dry hops in to get that same flavour. So actually, hops being one of the most expensive parts, we have to actually put more in to get that flavour. So it's all about the flavour and the kind of what is Goose IPA at the end over the what it's going to cost to brew it.
And then, you know, hops and barley are natural ingredients. You have a hot summer, cold summer, wet summer. You know, your alpha acids in your hops might change from year to year. Your fermentables in your barley might be slightly different. You know, rather like vintages of wine.
Yeah.
You know, that's more obviously going to be different from year to year, but you know, you have to tweak brewing recipes to reflect the harvest. It's as simple as that. Every brewery in the world has to do that. If you want the same level of bitterness one year to the next, you may have to alter your hop additions.
I mean, do you think that question that statement would be levelled at you if you hadn't sold up to ABI in 2011? Do you think that question would have come out?
I don't think so personally, because I think you know, we all know it's kind of easy to kick the big companies, and so I think it's probably fashionable to say that and to think that, you know, whether that it's a very difficult thing to prove for anybody outside the brewery unless you have a time machine. You bring a mid-90s IPA fresh and a 2016 IPA fresh and have them side by side.
Yeah.
You know,
I've
been drinking Goose.
You can't do an aged IPA.
You can't do an aged. Yeah, you can't do. Not this kind of aged IPA. We'll move on to that later. But it's you know, and it's but what we do know is the brewers at the time and the brewers that are there now who've been there for many years working at Goose Island, they oversaw when we had to start moving into Baldwinsville Brewery to brew our core range. You know, 70% of Fulton Street was 312 when Goose Island took it over. That's a huge amount of capacity, which is now being given over to developing new amazing beers, broadening the range, being able to give a large range of new beers to people. To fans
so was
of Goose
the
Island.
312? There was more 312 being brewed in Fulton than
2011.
Anything else? So 312 was our main flyer. We've now got Green Line had kind of taken over from that, but 312, as Johnny said, 70% of the brewing capacity. That leaves 30% for Bourbon County Stout, Sour Sisters, IPA.
Honkers.
So actually what we have now, which is amazing, is we have capacity to innovate. We have Fulton Wood series, so we're bringing out lots of cool beers. You know, we're doing an amazing coffee pale ale, which I really want to get over here. I'm going to try and do that. And also, you know, we've got a 2-barrel brew kit in the brewery, so Mike Siegel's head of innovation and works with Tim Faith. And these guys actually, as well as brew, if you work in, say, finance or marketing at Goose or sales, which, you know, it's not a huge team, but you can put your name on the list to brew a beer with these guys if you've ever dreamt up a recipe. And we've got an amazing tap room, which we sort of refurbed a couple of years ago and put in. That beer will then be on sale in the tap room, and those ones that become, you know, really popular and cool can then be sort of again worked on and sold. So it's all about, it gives us more time to innovate. Things like 4-Star Pilsner, which is just coming over to the UK now, that started off as a beer. So we've got Pitchfork Music Festival in Chicago. We sort of normally do a beer most years with the music artists that play there. We did a beer with Run the Jewels one year. But the guys that put up all the rigging and stuff, actually, they wanted to make a beer themselves. Like, come on, guys, you do it with these guys, all these musicians. But what about us? We're here slogging it out.
We're doing the hard work.
Yeah, we're doing the hard work, exactly. So we're like, okay, guys, you know, what do you want to do? What do you want to see? And they're like, we'd like a Pilsner, because obviously we've got to work next morning. We don't want something too heavy. So it was a beer brewed. Generally, it'll go just for that festival and it disappears. But it was so popular that we did a Chicago release only. We changed the name to 4-Star Pils to make it relevant, and again, it's so popular we were able to scale it up, and we've now got it over in the UK, and it's those little sparks that we're able to be flexible at Fulton.
There's 4 stars on the Chicago flag, in case anyone's wondering.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, that's all right.
I was thinking.
The symbol of Chicago is the 4 stars.
4-Star petrol.
So you're still producing a solid core range, and you're innovating more, and just continuing on this theme. When, again, one of the comments we had, and this was from Nick Plain at the Mighty Jag, says that big companies will always look at profit, even if they insist the product won't change, it inevitably, I'll get that word out in a second, does. They'll always look for savings, whether it's cheaper or less ingredients, less time to mature. Profit rules over quality. What's the comeback to that? Is it all about profit, or are you still, I mean, you said in the Goose IPA, you're using more hops now. So actually, you could probably say that's more hop than it's ever been before.
I think you can.
In terms of,
yeah, I think you can. there are, you can make profit is always going to be important for any business. There will be no business whether you're a 2-3 man brewery, in a railway arch, whether you are, producing Budweiser. You have to make money out of it, otherwise no one has a job. So an element of profit is always going to be important for any business, because at the end of the day, every brewery, unless you're a home brewer, is a business that has to earn a living, and it has to pay your salary, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it. So I think it's important for drinkers to understand that every brewery is a business, regardless of size. There is no, for me, there is no point in downgrading what Goose IPA is. If you're a big company, you buy a smaller one. You're not just, as I said before, you're not just buying the brand name. You're buying the beer. You're buying the recipes. You're buying the integrity and the love that people have for the beer. And if you start sort of tinkering with it, let's say, well, Goose is 5.9, let's make it 4.5 because we'll sell more because of the tax. It'll cost less to make. Beer. You're making a different beer, and you're going to lose. Yeah. You're going to lose people instantly. So all the money that you've ploughed into buying this small brewery, you may as well set fire to be honest, because you've lost exactly what you've bought, and you're preserving what you've bought with that money by that investment. Yeah,
and specifically with Goose Island as well. We mentioned about the hops before. We're getting the same flavour, but we're having to put more money in to get that flavour. The beer comes first, and the quality comes first. We've had a large investment on our barrel warehouse for Bourbon County Stout and our Sour Sisters. It's 133,000 square foot facility. It's amazing. There is a lot of money and love that goes into this. Beer that we're going to taste in a sec as well is resurrecting an old recipe that's not been brewed for over 50 years, and being able to do those things, that's about investment, and it's about passion. Mike Siegel is passionate about historic recipes. Whenever he comes to the UK, he doesn't really want to taste the American hop forward beers that are being done here, although he still likes to try them. Mike wants to see old ales. He wants to taste traditional stuff, because he's like, you guys have got such a tradition and a heritage here. Mm-hmm. That's what he's interested in, and those passions. And again, we go back to kind of the brewers are still running. It's still business as usual at Goose Island, and the guys have their passions for what they want to do and what they want to brew, and we do.
And I sort of, without sort of wanting to sort of overplay, we're not naive in thinking that you can save money on beer, like a large company can save money on. If you're buying a million bottles, the same size bottle, rather than a small brewery buying 10,000, you can save money on things like that because of your purchasing power. You can save money on things which don't affect the quality of the beer inside the bottle. So there is elements of that, and I know some people say yes, they would hear that, but we don't compromise on the quality of the beer. But yeah, you can make savings if you've got larger buying power. That's just
that's the same with any merger in any company, though. I mean, even if you just go down to things like your labelling, that must be cheaper for however many millions of bottles you get labelled.
I'm sure if they buy those labels from the same people that make the labels for 10 other types of beer.
And the ability to produce cans as well, because we know the volume that you have to buy of cans. To be able
small volume is tough with cans.
So basically, summarising what we've just been talking about is what the acquisition has allowed is for Goose Island to actually increase what you're doing. So not only have you been able to sustain the core range, you've been able to offer it in different packages as well, so you're now bringing it in cans, but you've also been able to start innovating a little bit more and increasing on the new beers that you're trying. And one of the beers that you mentioned there, Josh, I think we're going to try next, which is kind of a new innovation for you guys.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us what we're going to have next?
Yeah, so
tell us the background to it, why you get it into our glasses, and then into our face, hopefully.
You can't really see this, but it's a lovely big bottle, and there's a few more. So this is Brewery Yard, and this is a beer that's it's been a few years in the making. As I said before, Mike Siegel, head of innovation at Goose, one of our brewers, very passionate, as I said before, about historic recipes. He actually got chatting to Ron Pattinson, and Ron Pattinson's sort of the guy that I think the quote is, if he doesn't know about the sort of history of the beer, then it's probably not worth knowing. The guy is met him and spent some time with him, and he's just crazy
He's
knowledge.
An encyclopedia.
There we go. But so these guys sort of met up, and they wanted to do a beer together and bring back a historical recipe. and Brewery Yard is what they came up with. So it's a stock pale ale, which is basically back in the sort of 19th century. It's almost at the time when pale ales and IPAs could have been seen to have been interchangeable as a style, but a stock pale ale is basically that beer going into that barrel and spending an amount of time sort of aging in the barrel. So the one that we've got today is it's a lovely, it's an 8.4%, 62 IBUs. It's a lovely stock ale.
Yeah, so it's this stock pale ales. So Ron Pattinson's done a lot of research on it, and it's named Brewery Yard after the Bass Brewery Yard where they used to age their stock pale ale. Although the recipe is based on I believe it's a Truman's recipe. So back in the 1800s, what we now know as IPA would have been brewed and would have been aged for a good sort of 10 months to a year before it even was put on the ship on the way to India. And this would have been aged by Bass. It was aged in an outdoor brewery yard. The only protection it had was lots of hops for antibacterial purposes, and wet straw was put on it during the hot months to sort of try and in an effort to keep it reasonably cool. The thing which was true about all aged beers in Britain at the time was that it had wild yeast, Brettanomyces, in it. And Ron and Mike dosed this with Brettanomyces clausenii, which was the generally seen as the British Brett. Brett is in the Belgian exclusive. It's wild yeast goes everywhere, as you might imagine, and this yeast was identified in around 1905 in British beer barrels. So this would have been aged in hogsheads for around a year with Brett, and that Brett would have been, it's a great oxygen and sugar scavenger, would have eaten up the rest of the sugars, so it's really dry. Eats sugars that the regular ale yeast Saccharomyces can't eat, and helps preserve the beer as well. Helps, because when you take away all those sugars, the bacteria doesn't really have anything to eat. Plus all those hops, and then we've come out with this beer. So tuck in.
Excellent. Oh.
Cheers.
Cheers.
It's a lovely funk on the nose.
It's so interesting because it's got the sort of funk on the nose that I absolutely hate.
I'll take the beer then.
No. Leave the beer
Nice
where it is.
Almost.
Because you get through that nose, and actually what you get to is this incredibly powerful beer underneath. It's got the bitterness that you would expect from a really, really fresh IPA. It's got a lasting dry finish on it, and it's incredibly drinkable as well for 8.5%. Did you say?
8.5. Yeah.
It doesn't feel that at all.
So it's got, for me as well, it's got that malt bodies there as well, and it balances it nicely. So actually we only had around 4,000 bottles of this produced, so it's a one-off. You know, it's not something that we're planning to brew again, but it was a great side project, and sadly, but you know, for me also,
yeah, I'd say
hopefully
that
not.
As well, having had a little sip of it, yeah.
Hopefully not the last though, because I'm sure Ron and Mike Siegel are probably going to be chatting to, you know, hopefully to dream up their next beer. So
hopefully this might inspire some British breweries to recreate British historic styles.
It's becoming quite a thing, isn't it? Because I mean, Pete McCarry, again, someone who listens to the show quite regularly, wrote about this one because he went to the event, and also about Carlsberg. They brought out one of their previous centuries-old recipe as well. Obviously, Fuller's do it quite regularly over here. It's probably the really big one in the UK. But like you say, there is a massive heritage. Why wouldn't you mine it when you can?
Well, I think that's the point. It's that we're all the new breweries, and as they are in the States as well as here, they're all looking to modern styles. But actually, you know, we've got, you know, and when we look at historic beers, we all look to Belgium quite regularly.
Yeah. And
actually, you know, the beers we got, and Fuller's are great at what they do with the past masters. But we've got an amazing history of beers. We've got an amazing relationship with wild yeast and aging beers in barrels and stuff like that in this country, and it's great to see people like Mike and Ron at Goose, you know, recreate this.
I find it interesting that you said that originally with this beer, if this was brewed in its original state, the hops were used as a preservative rather than for what we expect of hops now, which is to give you a big bitter punch in the face. Yeah.
It was all about the preservatives. With the hops.
It was, and we, you know, I mean, certainly brewing in Europe, with, you know, the first use of hops was in the 9th century. gathering wild hops. The first documentation was in the 12th century of them realizing that hops was a natural. We would now call them an antibacterial, but they would see it as something just prevented beer going sour, or helped prevent beer, or made it last a bit longer. So when they started brewing beers for India, it was well known at the time that hops was a great preservative. It had been known for centuries. But that's what it was used for. I mean, aging beer. We talk about sour beers in Belgium. We certainly didn't have as many sour beers here because we use hops. In our pale ale and our aged beers, we had October beers, which were well hopped as well, which were used for aging. We had aged beers that would have aged for over 21 years.
So we've got no new beers.
All the beers are stuff that's been done before.
Yeah, 100 years ago.
There's no innovation.
There's no new beer.
There's no innovation. Everything's been done before. That's essentially what you're saying.
Would this come out at 8.5% 100 years ago?
Well, the average strength for IPA was around 6.5. Ron sort of proved that.
Yeah.
But that was the average strength for most beer in this country.
General, wasn't it?
Unless you were sort of 12 and drinking at lunchtime, and you'd have had a sort of like a table beer or luncheon bitter, as it became known, those sort of lower ABV beers for the family. Most beer that you would have gone to an ale house or something, or whatever we call a pub now, would have been around 6.5%. There certainly were stronger beers as well. October beers, which were we think were the sort of antecedent of IPA, was around 11%, 12%, some of them. But heavily.
Not the sound of October in the old days.
Yeah.
Heavily But the interesting
well before Oktoberfest.
But the interesting thing that Mike Siegel did at Goose was he took chemical tests of how the bitterness changed. So this was dosed before fermentation with, I think, around 140 something IBUs. And a lot of Ron's recipes, if you look at Ron's, he's got a great book, Vintage Ales for the Home Brewer, and you look at all the IBUs for these, they're all like 90 to 120. They have ridiculously high IBUs. And we were brewing these beers, 100, 150, 200 years ago with these IBUs. It's not a new thing to put 100 IBUs in a beer. But Mike sort of tested the IBUs and saw how they declined. That you could put that in at the beginning, and that's what often people quote on the side of their bottle.
And
that's what you get. But actually, the IBUs, reduced to 62. So it's probably 3/5 or something, sort of off the top of my head, have reduced through aging, and that makes sense. All those high IBUs that people produce beer in the old days, that was designed for aging. So the IBUs would have naturally just sort of leveled down, and this kind of leveled off at around 62. You can see the sort of the chart, the sort of the bell curve kind of level out a little bit at the end.
So as
you can see,
balanced. Like we've got now.
But even with 60 IBUs, it doesn't.
So
it's not astringently bitter.
No,
but
it's a really mellow. It's a lovely bitterness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'm enjoying every sip of this beer as well. I mean, we've still got quite a lot in our glasses of this beer, and I think we're going to enjoy this for a while yet. We've got a couple more beers coming up, but they're going to be in part 2 of this episode. So just give our listeners a feel for what we've got coming up in part 2.
Absolutely. So part 2, we get to try one of the sour sisters. So we've got Halia, which is a great beer, sort of saison with fresh peaches. It's been secondary fermentation in wine barrels.
Sounds like everything I love in a beer.
Yeah, but no, be patient though, because it's a really
okay.
Really
I will
good
enter that one with an open mind.
Be open-minded. That's all I ask of you.
There you go.
Not every beer's for everyone.
Yeah.
And then we've got some Bourbon County Stout that we're going to be tasting as well.
A little bit excited about that. Got to admit, not gonna hide it.
No, not gonna hide that.
Yeah. Listen, it's been great chatting with you guys tonight. I've really enjoyed the beers that you've offered us, and also the insight that you've given us into Goose Island. Make sure you do tune in to episode 2 of this, because we've got more of the polls that we put out there to quiz the guys on, and we've got those amazing 2 beers to taste. So, cheers.
Cheers,
guys.
Thanks very much.